Okay.
All right. This week, of course, is the 9 days, and also it's Parshas Devarim. I'll focus on Tisha B'Av. My mother's yard site is Hey Av, but I will make reference. I will make reference to I'll make reference to Parshas Devarim also. Now, one of the questions that comes up is the Gemara in Pesachim tells us that there is no Neila on Tisha B'Av. Generally, a tiny tzibur, tinus that was proclaimed because the lack of rain or some other impending catastrophe. So at the conclusion of the day, there would be Tfilas Nila, as we say, Yom Kippur. Ata Nosing Yad Laposhim, it's sort of like a last plea with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when it comes to Tisha B'Av, the Gemara in Pesachim tells us that there is no requirement of Nila. The Gemara says if a person wants, they could say Nila because halavai sheyispalo adam kol hayom. But in terms of a chiyuv, of a requirement, there is no requirement of Neila on Tisha B'Av. And the question is, why is Tisha B'Av to be considered different from other Tanisei Tzibur? And in the notes of my uncle Shiurim, they mention two terutzim. One teretz is because the essence of Tisha B'Av and the essence of Tanis Tzibur is different. The essence of Tisha B'Av is aveilus, is mourning. The essence of Tanis Tzibur is tshuva. And as the Rambam at the beginning of Hilchos at the beginning of Hilchos Tanis says that at the time that there is a tzara that overtakes the Jewish people, so there is a mitzvah to fast. And the expression of the Rambam is that the fasting, the crying, the blowing of the chatzotzros, all of these actions are midarke tshuva. It's from the path of tshuva. And so the essence, the essence of Tanis Tzibur over an impending catastrophe is tshuva. However, Tisha B'Av, the essence of Tisha B'Av is aveilus, is mourning. We're mourning over the loss of the Beis Hamikdash. We're mourning over the Jewish people going into exile. And the Nila is identified with tshuva. It's not identified with aveilus. Nila atonosin yad laposhim. You, God, stretch out your hand to those who err, to those who sin. But that has nothing to do with aveilus. And while it's true, my uncle said that the Rambam does associate Tisha B'Av and the other tzomos with tshuva, but that's not the main aspect of the day. The main aspect of the day is aveilus, is mourning. And then those who wrote the note said that on other occasions, my uncle would say the reverse, not completely the reverse, but he would say that Tisha B'Av also is a day of tshuva, and the because any generation that the Beis Hamikdash was not rebuilt in its day, it's considered as if the Beis Hamikdash is being destroyed. So what makes us required? What makes us required in doing makes us required in fasting by a tiniest tzibur is the fact that the situation demands that we do tshuva. So when the Beis Hamikdash is not reestablished, not rebuilt, so the situation demands that we do tshuva as well. And so this is, and they mentioned that this, at times, my uncle, in a sense, deviated from the first explanation that he gave. Now, I don't think that the two approaches are really in conflict, but I want to explain why is that. Now, when it comes to the days of mourning before Tisha B'Av, so first we have the 3 weeks, and then we have Shivasa B'Tammuz, 3 weeks, and then we have the 9 days, and then we have Tisha B'Av. My grandfather would point out, and he would pass in shilas on this basis. My grandfather would point out that the 3 weeks could be identified with aveilus of shana. The halacha is that if a person loses a parent, so he is in a semi-state of mourning for a whole year. And that is similar to the aveilus, the mourning for the Beis Hamikdash of the 3 weeks. The 9 days, my uncle said, that is associated with Shloshim. And Tisha B'Av is associated with the aveilus, with the mourning of Shiva. And the question was raised. My uncle, I remember reading in one of the books that were written based on his shiurim, that he raised the question. He says, why is it that when it comes to mourning for a person who passed away, first we have Shiva, then we have Shloshim, and then we have the aveilus of Shana, the mourning. And when it comes to mourning over the Beis Hamikdash, we don't follow that order, but on the contrary, we follow the order of placing these other fasts, these other days of mourning before Tisha B'Av. The 3 weeks, that's like Shloshim. The 9 days, that's like excuse me, the 3 weeks, that's like the aveilus, the mourning of a year after a parent. The 9 days, that's like the aveilus of Shloshim of 30 days. And Tisha B'Av is like the aveilus of Shiva. Why is it that when they established these customs of aveilus, of mourning, they didn't establish it in the same manner that it exists in regard to mourning for someone who passed away? And in fact, it's in the opposite order. Now, my uncle said that there is a difference between aveilus yeshana and aveilus chadasha. And we find numerous differences between aveilus yeshana and aveilus chadasha. The prohibition of doing work. An avel is not allowed to do work. on Tisha B'Av, a place where they're accustomed to work, even though it's not the most proper thing, but a person is allowed to work. And then we find stringencies that apply to aveilus chadasha. Let's say a mourner who has to walk in the street where it's difficult to walk without shoes, under certain circumstances is allowed to walk with shoes outside in the public. But when it comes to Tisha B'Av, we don't find such a leniency mentioned. And so there is a difference between a new mourning meaning because of an event that just happened, because of someone who died, and aveilus yeshana, because mourning for an event that happened a long time ago. Why is it that way? And what I think is, when we take a look at Parshas Devarim, in Parshas Devarim, the Torah describes to us, and I have mentioned this before numerous times, describes Moshe Rabbeinu is telling over to the Jewish people the whole episode of the Meraglim, of the spies. And the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Jewish people, in telling over the catastrophe that overtook the Jewish people as a result of the spies. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, you came to me and you suggested that we send out spies. And I thought it was a good idea. And on the basis of the way it's written, Parshas Devarim, it seems clear that it was not a command of God that led to the Jewish people sending out spies. And it wasn't his command that led to the catastrophe that followed when the spies came back and encouraged the rebellion against Moshe and against HaKadosh Baruch Hu and against God. But when you take a look at Parsha Shalach, and I mentioned this before, so it says, Shlach l'cha anoshim, vayirab Hashem Moshe lemor, Shlach l'cha anoshim. God spoke to Moshe and said, send for yourself people to spy out the land. And the question is, so the Chazal are already troubled by the contradiction between Parshas Shalach, the apparent contradiction, I should say, between Parshas Shalach and Parshas Devarim. And the Chazal tell us, God said, Shlach l'cha. Send for yourself. If you want, choose. He gave them permission. B'derech she'adam chafetz leilech kach molichan oso. Sometimes in the path that a person wants to go, we enable him to go in that path. It's not that we suggest that he go in that path. And that path is likely to lead him to trouble. But that's the path he wants. So Chazal tell us, our sages tell us, that first the people came to Moshe. And they said to Moshe, we want to send spies. Moshe said, to me, it sounds like a good idea. He asked God, and God gave him permission. So shlach l'cha, if you choose to do so. However, if somebody reads the Parsha of Shlach, and remember the Parsha of Shlach is mentioned before Parshas Devarim, one gets the impression that it wasn't mere permission, but it almost sounds like it was a command from God. Why is it that way? But the answer is the Torah wants us, in a sense, when it's telling us about the Jewish people traversing the desert, in a sense, to experience the feelings and the emotions and the attitudes that existed at that time. Because if we don't realize the mistakes that were made, we are likely to repeat them. So the Torah is telling us that the Torah makes it sound like it was a command from God. Why? Because very often when one wants a heter, when one wants a leniency, in order to give the leniency religious fervor, so what do? They try to turn it into a mitzvah. I remember years ago, my father was the first one, I think, to observe yeshana. Yeshana is something, I'm not saying to our shiitists that you don't have to observe it. But I remember when my father started observing yeshana, so some of the people, the Dafka people on the right, the people on the left couldn't care less what bread my father ate. But people on the right, they didn't want to be out-chumred by my father. My father was considered a liberal. And they didn't want to be out-chumred. My father didn't do it because of a chumrah. My father did it because that was the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. That was the psak of the Rambam. And he was following what the psakim were. And in Europe, while most of the Jewish people were lenient in their observance of chadasha in Europe because of the special hardships that were involved at that time, many of which do not exist today, the families of many of the Rabbanim of the Gedolei Yisrael, they observed yeshana. It's well known that the Chavetz Chaim observed yeshana. I remember when somebody went on a whole campaign against my father, he said the Chavetz Chaim didn't observe yeshana. He apparently did not read the Chavetz Chaim's son's biography, because it's very clear that they observe yeshana. So it wasn't enough to say, oh, it's a chumrah. It's a brisker chumrah. They could have said that. There are a lot of brisker chumras that they don't observe. No. They had to say it was usher to observe yeshana. Because if you observe yeshana, it's yura. It's haughtiness. All the strange chumras that they do was anivus. But a chumrah that someone has that they don't have. So it's usher to observe yeshana. So why? Because they want to give their kula a religious fervor. They had trouble. I don't know what they did. So they went out of their way at dinners. They used to ask, is some bread chadash or is bread yashan? And then if they heard there were two types of bread, two types of cake, so they would go out of their way to take the chadash cake from the other end of the table. I don't know what they did immediately after Pesach when everything was yashan. But this because why? They wanted to give the kula, the leniency, religious fervor. And this was what happened with the Meraglim also. And this was the impression the Jewish people at the time of the Meraglim had as to what was going on. They thought, they so much wanted to send spies that it wasn't enough that HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed it, but in order to give it religious fervor, in their minds, it had to be a mitzvah. They had to see it as a command from God. So consequently, the Torah wrote it in such a way that unless someone is aware of the drasha of Chazal, they would say it was a command of God when they read Parsha Shlach. So, but when we get to Parsha's Devarim, after we saw the catastrophe that took place from the sin of the Meraglim, so after we saw the catastrophe that took place from the sin of the Meraglim, so then we look back with a different perspective, and we begin to realize it wasn't a command from God. It initiated from the Jewish people. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, and I like the idea at that time. In other words, when we look forward, we have one perspective. When we look backward, when we are able to reevaluate, when we're able to see the outcome, we have a different perspective. And I think that's part of the difference between aveilus yeshana and aveilus chadasha. In other words, Chazal, when they instituted the minhagim of the 3 weeks, okay, the 3 weeks is minhagim, but it was the minhagim that were observed, and it seems to have been observed for many, many years. It wasn't even before it became a common practice, but there were always people who during the 3 weeks observed forms of aveilus, forms of mourning. And so we should be able to see it from an altogether different perspective. Now, I think that the question is, what are we mourning on Tisha B'Av? What are we mourning on Tisha B'Av? We're mourning the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. We're mourning the end of the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, the end of the service in the temple. We're mourning the fact that the Jewish people were sent into exile. But it's more than just that. We are not mourning just what happened, but we're mourning what caused what happened. From aveilus chadasha, it's difficult to mourn the cause because we don't realize what happened till after it happened. But in aveilus yeshana, we had time to think. We had a whole year. We know that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of the way we acted. As the Rambam says, any time that the Beis Hamikdash was not rebuilt, we should consider it as if it was destroyed. Because if the Beis Hamikdash had been in existence, it would have been destroyed because of our sins, which is similar to the sins of our ancestors at the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And Reb Chaim Volozhiner in the Nefesh HaChaim, when he talks about the control that man's deeds has over heaven, he says the Beis Hamikdash Lamata, the Beis Hamikdash down here on earth, could not be destroyed until the Beis Hamikdash Lamala, up in heaven, was destroyed. He says the Babylonians and the Romans, they destroyed the Beis Hamikdash Lamata, the Beis Hamikdash down on earth. But it's our deeds that destroyed the Beis Hamikdash Lamala, that destroyed the Beis Hamikdash up in heaven. So I think that that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons why that's one of the reasons why we the 3 weeks, the 3 weeks which corresponds with the aveilus of a year, and the 9 days which corresponds with the aveilus, with the mourning period of Shloshim, come before Tisha B'Av, which corresponds with the Shiva mourning, in order to emphasize we're not just mourning the Beis HaMikdash, the building of the Beis HaMikdash, we're mourning the cause of the building of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And it's interesting that the Rambam says, so in a sense, the mourning that we do is a mourning of the realization of the impact that our deeds had. And the Rambam when you take a look and you contrast the Rambam in Perek Aleph of Hilchos Tshuva and the Rambam in Perek Hey of Hilchos Tshuva, he uses similar words, but different words. When in Perek Aleph of Hilchos Tshuva, when he talks about Tainis Tzibor, because of a fast day, a public fast day that was proclaimed because of an impending catastrophe, the Rambam says, "V'humi darkei hatshuva." It's part of the road of tshuva, the pathway of tshuva. But the Rambam in Hilchos Tainis, when he talks about the 4 tzomos, when he talks about the 4 fast days, so there he doesn't say midarkei hatshuva, but he says the purpose of the 4 fast days, including Tisha B'Av, is liftoach darkei tshuva, to open the doors of the way of tshuva. To open the doors of the way of tshuva. Why is there this difference? Yes, when we realize the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, it's a catastrophe, as my uncle said. But the point is like this: what is unfortunate is that we're used to Golus. We're used to exile. I remember as a young boy, they used to tell over the story. This was among the popular sermonic stories that rabbis used to say. I don't know if the story was true or the story wasn't true, and even if the story wasn't true, it's true in terms of attitude. He said, the story goes that they used to have Devarim, seders, in the shuls, and then they said the halach manya. They started the halach manya. The rabbi explained, and as he says, l'shana haba ba'arad Yisrael. Next year I'll be in the land of Israel. And the story goes that the president of the shul stood up and said, "I like it in America." I don't think it really happened that way, but as expressive as it was with some feelings that existed at that time, it's more expressive, the feelings that exist today. We could say what we want. We could sing and dance and everything. Unfortunately, when you evaluate the individuals, and some of the frumest among them, I like it in America. It's not a question I like it in America. I like it in Golus. I like it in exile. We came used to Golus. You think we came used to Golus because of the wealth that there is in America? How many opportunities historically did many Jews have to leave Europe for one reason or another. I'm not saying that every Jew had those opportunities, but there were many such opportunities. Okay, in Eretz Yisrael, it's still Golus. But you see the fact that they wanted to stay in Europe, in an area that was full of anti-Semitism, that there were pogroms every other time. It means that there was a certain degree of comfort, of security, whatever you want to call it, false security in Europe. And I think there is still such a sense of false security. Actually, I think it's even worse today. Now, what's the idea of the Toach Darkei Tshuva? The idea of the Toach Darkei Tshuva is we don't realize what Golus is. We don't realize what exile is. We don't realize anymore the impact of the Churban, of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. We've become used to it. The Toach Darkei Tshuva is for us to be aware how insecure our situation is in Golus, in exile. And to realize what caused that insecure situation. That's L'Toach Darkei Tshuva. So before we try to do tshuva, before we complete, the beginning of the process of tshuva, I should say, the beginning of L'Toach Darkei Tshuva, to open the pathway to tshuva, is to realize our situation, to realize what caused our situation, to realize what caused our situation. So this is the when it comes to Tainus Tzibur, however, when the enemy is at the door, when the army is passing our borders, we don't need to be convinced, or we shouldn't need to be convinced about the insecurity of our situation. We know the insecurity. We know the trouble. We have to immediately be in the path of tshuva. But when it comes to Tisha B'Av, it's aveilus yeshana. It's over an event that happened almost 2,000 years ago. Then the issue is realizing what our situation is. So Tisha B'Av and the other fast days is L'Toach Darkei Tshuva, and to open the pathway of tshuva. Now, when it comes to saying Neila is to be said at the completion of the tshuva process. Neila is to be said at the completion of the tshuva process, not when you're opening the door to the tshuva process. Consequently, Neila is not said on Tisha B'Av. Now, it's interesting. It's interesting that according to the Shulchan Aruch, my uncle gave another teretz as to why we do not say Neila on Tisha B'Av, because the pasuk in In Eich, I think Perigimel, Shosam Tfilasi, my tefillah was shut out. In other words, at least for parts of Tisha B'Av, we don't say Tiskabel, because to a certain degree, we do not anticipate our tefillahs being accepted on Tisha B'Av, at least for parts of Tisha B'Av. And the Neila has to be said on a day that the whole day and all the tefillahs of the day are days where the tefillahs are in a state to be accepted. So consequently, Chachamim did not institute the extra requirement of Neila on Tisha B'Av. And my uncle used that also to explain that why we don't say Tachanun on Tisha B'Av, because Tachanun is also to a certain degree an extra prayer. And this Tisha B'Av is not a day dedicated to prayer. On the contrary, we have to daven because there's a chiyuv to daven, because there's a mitzvah. We have to daven 3 times a day. But it's a day where we feel separation between God and the Jewish people. And prayer represents the linkage, the closeness between God and the Jewish people. Now, but there's another reason given why we don't say Tachanan on Tisha B'Av. And that is because Tisha B'Av's Ikri Moed, Kralai Moed, it's called a Moed. A Moed means a set time, but it also means a holiday. So Tisha B'Av, from a certain perspective, is to be considered a holiday. But the question arises, why is it to be considered? Why should it be considered a holiday? Now, you could say, because of the pasuk in Skaya says, Tzoma Reviv, Tzoma Chamishi, Tzoma Shviv, Tzoma Asiri, Yel Aveilus Yehuda L'Sasam L'Simcha. All the 4 fast days will be days of joy, or Moadim Tovim, and good holidays. So, but the question is, but that applies to the other fast days also, the pasuk in Skaya. And in the other fast days, on the contrary, we do say Tachanun, we say Slichas, we say Avinu Malkeinu. So why do you say that on the other fast days, that Tisha B'Av is a holiday? That's why we don't say Tachanun. And that should be true about all the other fast days also. So I think there's a different reason why. Chazal tell us, Kol HaMesabel, I mentioned in the name of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. My father, when he was Menachem Ovel, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he mentioned what Reb Chaim Volozhiner said to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He's Kol HaMesabel al Yerushalayim Zoa V'Roa B'Nechamasa or Simchasa. Whoever mourns over Yerushalayim, Zocha, he merits and sees in its consolation and its joy. And the question is, it should say will merit and will see in its joy. Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner said no. He merits and sees in its joy right now. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe understood what Reb Chaim Volozhiner meant was because, as the Nefesh HaChaim says, and as most of the Sifrei Kabbalah say, that before the Beis Hamikdash Lamata, the Beis Hamikdash down on earth could be rebuilt. The Beis Hamikdash Lamala has to be rebuilt. And we can rebuild the Beis Hamikdash Lamala right now. So when you're Mesabel and Yerushalayim, that contributes to the building of the Beis Hamikdash Lamala up in heaven, which will then allow the Jews to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash Lamata. But my father said to the Rabbi, he said, he didn't deny that that's true, but he said, the Zoche B'Ro B'Nechamasa, you merit and you see in the consolation, not just in heaven, but you Zoche B'Ro B'Nechamasa, even down here on earth. And I want to bring a raya for my father from the Gemara in Makis. The Gemara in Makis says that Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues were standing near the Beis Hamikdash, and they Mount Scopus, and they saw a fox going out from the Holy of Holies, the area where only the Kohen Gadol, the high court, the high priest of Israel, the high Kohen of Israel, could go in one day a year. And Rabbi Akiva's colleagues tore their clothes and they began crying. Rabbi Akiva Mitzachek, and Rabbi Akiva seemed to be happy, joyful. The colleagues, in a state of shock, asked Rabbi Akiva, why is it that you seem so happy when you see this devastation, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? And Rabbi Akiva said, because I know that based on Psukim and the Nevi'im, that the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is going to bring about the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. Now that I see the full destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, I can sense its rebuilding. I would assume that part of it was the idea, why is it that the Romans destroyed the Beis Hamikdash? Because they thought if they could destroy the Beis Hamikdash, they could destroy the Jewish people, they could destroy the religion, they could destroy the Masorah. When Rabbi Akiva saw the Beis Hamikdash completely destroyed and the Masorah continued, says Mitzachek, in a sense, he was able to see through the destruction. He was able to sense the process of the return of the Jewish people, the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, even down here on earth. And I think that also, there's a medrash, the medrash says, and it's very interesting, you see, we have 3 weeks of perennials, 3 weeks of mourning, 3 special haftarahs. And then we have 7 haftarahs of nechama, of consolation. And the question is, I'll discuss it more in future weeks probably, but I'll offer other suggestions. I think it has to do with the machlokas rishonim. But why is it 3 weeks of mourning and 7 weeks of consolation? But I think what it is that there is a relationship, because the 7 weeks of consolation, according to the opinions, that we read only the special haftarahs in the consolation. So the 7 weeks of consolation brings us up to Rosh Hashanah, up to the Aseres Yemei Tshuva. There is a connection between the 3 weeks, Tisha B'Av, the Shiva Nechemta, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippurim. It's all connected one to the other. In other words, the idea of Tisha B'Av and the 3 weeks is we don't realize we're in trouble. We don't realize what exile means. We don't realize it on a mundane level, on a safety level, or on a spiritual level. And then Tisha B'Av comes and it reminds us of what happened and why it happened. and we're likely to fall into a depression. And we're likely to say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu cut himself off from us. There's no hope. So comes the Shiva de Nechemta, the 7 weeks of Nechama. And the 7 weeks of Nechama comes and says, there is hope. The 7 weeks of Nechama comes and says there is hope. In other words, the idea of Tisha B'Av, in a sense, is the beginning of the process of return of Yom HaKippurim. Matter of fact, the Medrash says that Mashiach, it's not to be taken literally, Mashiach was born on the day the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. What does that mean? It means the trip, as I have explained many times, the trip away from Yerushalayim, the trip away from Eretz Yisrael, the trip into exile is both is trip, on one hand, away from Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael, but it's also a trip towards Eretz Yisrael and towards Yerushalayim. On Tisha B'Av, the trip back began. And that's why Tisha B'Av is considered a moed, because the other fast days will be holidays when Mashiach comes. But Tisha B'Av is the anniversary when the trip back to Eretz Yisrael, back to Yerushalayim began. And I think, so this is why we have 3 weeks of mourning, but 7 weeks of Nechama. It's to link the mourning, which is at its apex with Tisha B'Av, with Rosh Hashanah and Yom HaKippurim, with the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, with the 10 days of Tshuva. And because of that, so in a sense, it represents also the beginning. That's why it represents the beginning of the return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the return of the Beis HaMikdash, and the return from exile. And that's why it's a holiday. Now, and we could add another explanation as to why. The days of mourning, the shloshim, the 3 weeks, which is the shloshim of Tisha B'Av, the 9 days, which is, the year of aveilus of Tisha B'Av, the 9 days, which is the shloshim, come before Tisha B'Av, because the whole purpose after Tisha B'Av, on the contrary, because Tisha B'Av, we came in contact with reality. And because we came in contact with reality, we are in a state of depression. And when we're in a state of depression, it's difficult to do tshuva. So then we have the Shiva de Nechemta. The mourning is before Tisha B'Av. After Tisha B'Av, it's the process of return. And that's what we have to know about Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av represents the idea that Gullus is not just a trip away from Eretz Yisrael, it's a trip towards Eretz Yisrael. It's not going deeper into exile, but it's leaving exile. I want to say about my mother, there's a lot to say, and I'm not going to give a hesped now, but one of the special, everybody knew how special Eretz Yisrael was in her mind. And there's a story, I mention it quite often because it says something about her, that's very, very special. For what she bought, my parents bought an apartment in Ramat Beit Shemesh, and my mother wanted very badly that the apartment should have a garden. And why did she want it to have a garden? She said because she wants to be able to bring Bikurim when Mashiach comes. Without going into the halachic aspects of that, she was a person who, and this was sincere, she was a person who not only believed in the coming of Mashiach, but she was looking mitzapel biyaso. She was looking forward to it. She was looking forward to going to the Beis Hamikdash, to bring the Bikurim, to feel that closeness of old. And, we in America, when I'm talking about America, I'm not just talking about America. I'm talking about Israel. I'm talking about the Jews all over. America is just a word for post-World War II. We have, unfortunately, become very comfortable with Gullus, much more so than the Jews in Europe. And there's reasons for it. But we lack that mitzapel biyasa. We can sing all we want. Ani mamin, ani mamin, ani mamin. It's another one thing to sing. It's another thing to really, that should be part of you. To my mother, it was part of her. It wasn't just a song. It wasn't just words that we say. It was part of who she really was. And she had that in mind when she bought a house. She wanted a garden so she'd be able to bring Bikurim. It wasn't because she wanted to participate in the parade, although there was a parade in the beginning of Bikurim. She wanted to go to the Beis Hamikdash. She felt something was lacking, but at the same time, she saw herself in the path of returning to Eretz Yisrael, of returning to Yerushalayim, and in a sense being part of the return of the Jewish people to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay.
If anyone has a question, please put it in the chat. Okay, no questions, it doesn't look like. Okay, do you know what the plan is for next week?
Well, I will notify them. Maybe we'll make something Thursday evening. I don't know whether we should have something special on Tisha B'Av or not. Let me think it over.
Yes, everyone, next Sunday is Tisha B'Av. So just stay tuned for your announcement for the regular email about share if we're going to have something earlier or have something on Sunday.
We'll send it out earlier this week. Okay, everything should go well. Okay, everybody should have an easy fast.
Yeah, should the Mashiach not come by Tisha B'Av, do you think this will be the last Tisha B'Av?
There's an interesting story. Two interesting things. First of all, there was a minhag among the Jewish people in Europe, not in America. I guess the kinnis in America are too expensive. That they used to put the kinnis after Tisha B'Av, they would put it to be buried with the Svarim that had to be buried, the Shemus, because they were not anticipating saying kinnis the next year. And there's a very interesting story. I heard this from Rabbi Felder about Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein's granddaughter, when she was a young girl, was fasting a couple hours on Tisha B'Av, and she very proudly told Reb Moshe that I'm fasting because it's Tisha B'Av. And Reb Moshe's daughter-in-law said to Reb Moshe, she's doing it for chinuch. So Moshe Feinstein said, chinuch is for the future. There won't be a Tisha B'Av in the future. We don't need chinuch now for it. So we hope that my attitude in these things are, we look forward to Mashiach coming as soon as possible. We believe that it's very possible that he could come. True, it seems strange, but there are a lot of strange things that have happened. Let's just take a look at the political situation in this country. Actually, for the worse sometimes. The things that people would never have believed before. And sometimes for the better, the fall of the Soviet Union and all these things. When I was a boy, whoever thought that the Soviet Union would fall? But strange things happen. So we have to, so we look forward to Mashiach coming, even though from the perspective of the outside world, it would seem very strange, but a lot of things, strange things happen. And we have to, mitzapel b'yasar, we hope that it'll come before Tisha B'Av. Doesn't come before Tisha B'Av, as soon as possible after Tisha B'Av.
Okay, a question. When did your father take his shoes off after Shabbos? So when does everything start? I guess the Inuyim.
I think my impression was that, first of all, when my father went to shul, so at that point he already, it was already, Shabbos was over, so it wasn't a big issue, even though, in other words, only as long as you keep Shabbos. And then he had a feeling that some of the shoes that we wear today, because of style changes, some of the shoes that we have today isn't outright non-leather shoes. Some of the non-leather shoes that we have today is not outright, aveilus, or acts of aveilus. So, and especially my father, because of his stroke, he needed very special shoes that were not easy to put on. So my assumption is that he, based on the things that I heard from him throughout the years, and based on the situation that he had in later years, that he felt that it would be okay if it's a dignified pair of shoes that people tend to wear even on special occasions, even on Shabbos, that would be okay to put it on before you went to shul.
And then I don't know, do we keep Rabbeinu Tam as a chumrah or ikar din? I guess for those who keep
Clearly as a chumrah.
Why, according to Rashi and other opinions, Rabbeinu Tam is a kula.
No, you mean talking Rashi beginning of brachas?
Rashi is 90 minutes.
Oh, but Rashi himself did not have Rabbeinu Tam Shita. If you take Rashi's sheer mill and you apply it to Rabbeinu Tam, it's 90 minutes.
Oh, okay.
But Rashi himself did not hold of Rabbeinu Tam, except for one Rashi at the beginning of brachas that's not in our edition of the Gemara. It's in the Sansino edition, the first published Gemara edition. But aside from that Rashi clearly held like the Gonim, except according to the Radbaz, who said that he held like Rabbeinu Tam. So but for this, I think my father felt you could be Mako. That's no question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.